So now we speak about the formidable foes. So there are several absolutely clear scientific indicators that we are all, as humans, Homo sapiens, plant-based consumers. We're just going to talk about three and then preface it with a few other things. There's three incontrovertible facts about plant-based diets and the requirement we have to consume them. The number one is clear. I want you to really look at this. And there's a lot of discussion about it, but we are going to lay it out today in a way that we should silence any debate over if we're carnivores or omnivores or herbivores and human. So look at your screen there at the carnivore's teeth. Next to it, you see the herbivore. They consume animal and plant. Then we go down to the herbivore, the frugivore, and then the human teeth. Now, what I want you to really note, without any hesitation, that in 100% of the cases, a carnivore has fangs. Now, the silliness to say that the two little pointy teeth that we have towards the front of our mouth are for meat consumption is ridiculous. That's to rip leaf. If you look at an omnivore, they have less fangs because they're not exclusively eating animals. They basically also need some of what an herbivore has, grinders in the back, etc. And so clearly, if you look at what our teeth look like and what a carnivore and an herbivore looks like, we are not the same. Secondly, every single creature that, by the way, is a plant-based eater stands up on two legs. There's no other creature that stands up, as we do, upright on two legs as a plant-based consumer. The next thing I want to point out is the hands. Our hands are very flexible and movable. And in fact, look at how we can address picking up different things, where the fact is a carnivore has claws, and they require the claws in the consumption of the food that they're meant to eat. Now, there's a place for carnivores. Remember that the balance that was here, the ecosystem balance, up until man came in and intervened and started to throw everything out of kilter, was there were certain animals that would grow in large herds, and the carnivores made sure that that was kept at a lower population. Also, birds evolved like vultures to clean up the carcasses of dead animals to reduce bacterial and microbial infection, not only for humans, obviously, but for other creatures. Now, the second, we want to look at a dog, which is a typical and a very familiar carnivore. And this is reflective of every carnivore's intestinal tract. It's very short, and it's loaded with hydrochloric acid. So much so that if you put your fist inside of the intestinal tract of a dog and let it sit there for a couple of minutes, the flesh would be eaten off. That's how active the hydrochloric acid is. We have this elongated intestinal tract that's about 9 times your height. So if you weigh, not weigh, but if you're 6 feet high, it's 6 times 9. And what's amazing, it's very sophisticated, that along the way, it actually absorbs nutrients from plants and the cellulose in plants, categorically takes out the different forms of nutrients, not only the obvious vitamins, minerals, proteins, etc., but the phytonutrients, the phenols, etc. And this evolved over God knows how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. The next thing you have to know, and I made a presentation on The Real Truth About Health on this subject, the recent data now absolutely indicates without any hesitation that your intestinal flora and fauna is actually built to be consuming only plants. And the reality of that is that these plants have the kind of nutrient cofactors in them that literally allow the bacteria to flourish in a particular way. And by flourishing, activate 80% of your immune system, which is actually your protector from disease and aging. Ultimately, what's more impressive than anything else is 90% of the happy juices, serotonin, literally are dependent upon you eating a plant-based diet. And a raw plant-based diet is actually what it's really after. Because when you eat the raw food, it has everything intact. There's no disturbance of the cofactor nutrients that work together as an orchestra. And if you look at the data that's coming out recently, it points clearly to the fact it must be uncooked and unprocessed plant-based food. And Prevotella is one of them where we actually see you don't even develop this. This is one of the 3 legs in immune and psychology function of the bacterial count. Doesn't even exist at any significant level without those plant-based foods. Now we're going to take a voyage into different types of problems that we have on other so-called foods that we consume and eat. But look at this. When I was a boy, I was absolutely, utterly convinced that we would starve and I would starve to death if I didn't consume hamburgers and steak. And it was something that everyone aspired to. Now, if you look at the difference, I want you to look at this chart closely at the protein levels in beef versus the protein levels in broccoli. Note that the broccoli has more proteins, by far more proteins. And you also have to understand, when you look at the chart there, that there's a wide array of other nutrients that you do not get by, in fact, consuming a meat diet. And there's a lot of things that you do get that you don't want, like saturated fats. It's so absolutely important for you to understand these things because there's so much evidence on this today. There's no thinking person that could actually debate it. Look at pork versus algae. Once again, we all know that pork's not good, even if you still consume this non-human food. The fact is, algae has significantly more protein, and again, a wide array of other nutrients that you do not get when you consume the pork. But what you do get is more heart attacks, more strokes, more cancer, more diabetes, more premature aging, and more obesity, and we're going to get into this as we go through this presentation. Chicken versus lettuce. This is probably the most interesting of all, because a lot of people out there today, especially people who really think they're in the know, and they go to the health food store and they buy so-called free-range type of animal-based foods. The fact of the matter is that lettuce has significantly more protein than does chicken. Because people say, well, I don't eat meat, I eat chicken. That happens to be a meat. And in fact, when you look at what else is missing when it comes to chicken, here's what they don't tell you. That the brilliant work of my colleague and now deceased friend, Dr. Virginia Livingston, after 70 years of work, told us that the #1 meat cause for every form of cancer happens to be chicken. I never heard anyone getting anything but healthy from lettuce. As a matter of fact, even before there was a move forward in healthy living, everyone knew that lettuce would actually reduce weight and make you feel better. 3 other things I want to point out before we move on. #1, why not cooking? Well, way back in 1933, Rishkikanov over at Pasteur Institute in Paris showed us that when you cook any food, including a plant-based food, that the structure turns to something that appears like a carbon to the immune system. When that happens, the immune system clicks on and attacks it. So that means when you're consuming a cooked food of any type, it's compromising the very immune system that prevents all disease and helps to slow the aging process. The second thing that happened is almost 70 years ago, they discovered heating of any form of oil. We're not just talking about the notorious saturated fat you get in animal-based foods. Literally makes it carcinogenic, and in recent decades, we can also add increases the chances of diabetes and heart disease. That means heart attacks and strokes. Now look at fish versus chia seed. Now fish, of course, people keep going down the list and say, well, I don't eat red meat, I don't eat pork, I eat chicken. And then some say, no, I don't eat chicken, I eat fish. Well, you're going to hear a lot about fish during this time we have together, but the reality is chia seed is significantly higher in all of the things that we want versus fish, which is higher in disease-causing chemistry.